For 12,000 years, the vast Galactic Empire was the only game in town. They ruled 1,000 star systems with an iron fist and had tens of thousands of warships to back it up. Their word was law. But after that long on top, you get a little lazy, a little arrogant. And what happens when the biggest bully in the galaxy finally picks on the wrong quiet kid? Stick around, because you're about to find out. On the bridge of his cruiser, the Iron Dominion, Commander Kethaval was dying of boredom. In his 60 years of service, he'd seen it all, and nothing impressed him anymore. Crushing rebellions felt as exciting as flossing. He lived by a simple creed: the strong rule, the weak obey. It was the law of the universe. His fleet of 12 warships was on babysitting duty near the Keldon Nebula, a pointless swirl of gas and dead stars, the galaxy's forgotten corner. "Commander," his sensor tech's voice cut through the silence, "we've got an unknown ship entering the sector." Kethaval actually sat up, a flicker of interest in his tired eyes. "Unknown? Do tell." "Its design is a complete blank, sir. Nothing in the Imperial database. It's just cruising straight through the nebula like it owns the place." Kethaval frowned. Every species with so much as a rusty rocket had been catalogued and conquered by the Vath. An unknown ship shouldn't be possible. "Put it on screen," he ordered. The main view screen shimmered, revealing a vessel that was utterly alien. It was big, maybe half the size of his cruiser, with a dull, dark gray hull. The design was all function, no flash, with zero markings except for one tiny symbol on its side, a little swirl of blue and green. "Where did it come from?" Kethaval barked. The sensor officer's fingers danced across his console. "Tracing its trajectory. Commander, it looks like it came from—" He paused, his face scrunching up in disbelief. "The Sol system." A loud, obnoxious laugh echoed across the bridge. It was Lieutenant Vorsoon, the ship's cocky young weapons officer. "The Sol system?" Vorsoon scoffed. "You mean where the humans are from? Aren't those the primitives still trying to launch tin cans at their own moon?" Kethaval vaguely recalled the file. A survey team had visited their little mudball about 40 years ago, noting a species obsessed with chemical rockets. They were slapped with a threat rating of 7, the absolute bottom of the barrel. They were so insignificant, it wasn't even worth the fuel to conquer them. The survey team had a good chuckle listening to their ancient radio waves before moving on. Humans were a cosmic joke. "Well, well, looks like the little monkeys finally built a real spaceship," Kethaval said with a smirk. "Isn't that adorable? Alert the fleet. We're going to intercept this little toy and explain why you don't wander into our backyard." The 12 Vath warships shifted direction, moving like a pack of sharks that just smelled blood. But the human ship didn't even blink. It didn't speed up. It didn't slow down. It didn't turn. It just kept gliding forward, as if 12 massive warships were nothing more than a minor inconvenience. "They probably haven't even noticed us," Vorsoon jeered. "I bet their sensors are made of wood." "Open a hailing frequency," Kethaval commanded. "Let's give them a proper Vath welcome." The comms officer nodded. "Channel is live, Commander." Kethaval stood, his voice booming with absolute power. "Attention, unidentified vessel. This is Commander Kethaval of the Vath Imperial Navy. You have illegally entered our sovereign territory. Shut down your engines and prepare for boarding. Refuse, and we will atomize you. You have 30 seconds to comply." He waited. The bridge was dead silent, every officer staring at the screen. 30 seconds passed. The human ship just kept sailing on, completely ignoring his command. "Maybe they don't understand the language," the comms officer whispered. "Their translator is probably junk." "Then let's speak the one language the whole galaxy understands," Vorsoon said, practically vibrating with excitement. "Commander, permission to fire a warning shot." Kethaval considered it. The ship was harmless, but ignoring him was an insult that could not stand. "Permission granted," he snapped. "Fire one plasma burst across their bow." A wicked grin spread across Vorsoon's face. A blinding bolt of plasma tore through the void, screaming past the human ship so close it should have shaken them to their core. Any sane crew would have surrendered on the spot. But the human ship didn't so much as twitch. It just stayed its course, as steady and predictable as a sunrise. "They're either the bravest souls in the galaxy or the dumbest," Kethaval muttered. "Get us closer. I want a full scan of that ship, top to bottom." The Iron Dominion lunged forward as its escort spread out, trapping the intruder. The sensor officer fired up the deep scan system, a piece of tech that could practically read the minds of anyone on a normal ship. "Scanning now, Commander," the officer said, before trailing off. "Hold on. These readings. This can't be right." "What is it?" "The hull, sir. Our scanners are just bouncing off. They can't get a lock." The officer cranked the scanner to 100% power. The console whined. For a few tense seconds, there was nothing. Then, a tiny trickle of data began to flow in. The officer's face went white as a sheet, his smug confidence melted away, and his hands began to shake. "Commander," he stammered, his voice barely a whisper, You need to see this." Kethaval strode over to the console. At first, the data looked like gibberish. He figured it was a glitch, but every diagnostic came back clean. The data was real. The human ship's hull was made of an alloy completely unknown to the Empire. It was impossibly dense, with an energy signature that defied all known physics. And deep in the ship's core, where the engine should have been, the scanners registered a power source generating more energy than his entire 12-ship battle group. "That's impossible," Kethaval whispered. "Humans are savages. They can't have tech like this." "Commander," the comms officer interrupted, "we're receiving a transmission from them." Kethaval's throat went dry. On screen, a woman's face appeared. She had dark hair and calm, intelligent eyes. She wore a simple uniform with that same blue and green circle on the shoulder. She looked directly into the camera, right at him, and there wasn't an ounce of fear on her face. "Commander Kethaval," she said, her accent in his language flawless. "My name is Captain Sarah Chen of the United Earth Navy vessel Quiet Dawn. Apologies for the delayed response. We wanted to give your scanners enough time to get a good look." Kethaval just stared, his mind racing to process what was happening. She knew his name. She spoke his language perfectly. She let them scan her. "You're in our space," he finally managed to say, the words sounding weak and hollow. "You're violating galactic law." Captain Chen gave him a small, knowing smile. "Oh, we're very familiar with your laws, Commander. We've been watching you for a very, very long time. We're not here for a fight. We're here to deliver a message." "What message?" "It's for your Emperor. We're on our way to your capital, and we're hoping this can be a friendly visit." Vorsoon stomped forward, his face turning a deep, furious purple. "You threaten us? 1 ship against 12? We will obliterate you!" Captain Chen's gaze shifted to the lieutenant, and her expression was almost pitying. "Lieutenant, I strongly advise against that." Her voice never lost its serene calm. "We have no desire to harm you, but make no mistake, we will defend ourselves." "Fire everything!" Vorsoon screamed, slamming his fist down on the weapons console. "Turn them to scrap!" "Stand down!" Kethaval bellowed, but he was too late. Vorsoon had already mashed the master fire control. Plasma cannons roared to life. A storm of missiles erupted from their launch tubes. Lances of pure energy carved through the darkness. 12 warships unleashed their full, devastating fury on the single, quiet human ship. And then, faster than a thought, the human ship moved. Kethaval had never seen such speed. One moment it was there, the next it was simply gone. The fleet's entire attack hit nothing but empty space. And then every single light on the Iron Dominion's bridge went out. The engines fell silent. The weapons went dead. Every system on the ship just stopped. Red emergency lights flickered on, casting the bridge in a hellish glow. Kethaval saw his crew, frozen at their stations in utter shock. "Report!" he yelled into the sudden darkness. "What in the name of the stars just happened?" His sensor officer stared at his blank console, his whole body trembling. "All ships are dead in the water, Commander. All 12 of us. We've been completely disabled." "How? What did they hit us with? I don't know, sir. There was no blast, no impact, no energy wave. They just turned us off. On the main screen, which had sputtered back to life, the human ship reappeared, floating peacefully. Captain Chen's face filled the screen again. "Commander Kethaval," she said, her voice now a soft, chilling whisper. "What happens when you're the biggest bully on the galactic playground and someone silently flips the board on you? Imagine your entire fleet, your very legacy, just dead in the water without a single shot fired. That was the nightmare Commander Keithall was trapped in, and the lesson he was about to learn would change the balance of power in the galaxy forever. You'll want to stick around to see how a species everyone wrote off as insignificant brought the universe's top dog to its knees." A calm voice filled his command bridge. "Your systems will be back online in about 2 hours. Your crews are fine. Your ships are unharmed. Please tell your leaders that humanity wants to talk. We'll be waiting for you at the border." And just like that, the transmission ended. The human vessel turned and vanished into the void, moving like a predator that had never known fear. Keithall just stared, his hands feeling like ice, his heart hammering against his ribs. In 60 years of celebrated service, he had never felt a terror this profound. "Get a message to Imperial Command," he managed to choke out. "Tell them what just happened. Tell them everything. And tell them the humans are coming." His massive warship, the Iron Dominion, just floated there, dark and helpless under the silent watch of a billion stars. Out in the darkness, humanity was waiting, and the Vorath Empire was about to get a serious reality check. Admiral Vothkor had served the Empire for over a century. He'd commanded fleets in 6 major wars and had personally brought 32 different worlds to heel. He was a living legend who had never known what it felt like to lose. His name was a weapon in itself, whispered with fear across star systems. But today, standing in the great hall of Imperial Command, he felt a strange, almost forgotten sensation creeping back. Doubt. Commander Kethal's message had arrived 3 hours earlier, a panicked, garbled mess on emergency channels because the communication grid for his entire patrol fleet had simply ceased to exist. The news had ripped through the military's top command like a superheated plasma round. Now, the most decorated officers in the Imperial Navy stood in a heavy, bewildered silence, starving for answers that no one could provide. "Run the recording again?" Admiral Vothkor commanded. A hologram shimmered into existence, displaying the sensor logs from the Iron Dominion. You could see the bizarre human ship, the readings that seemed to mock the laws of physics, and the precise moment that 12 of the Vorath's finest warships were reduced to powerless, floating tombs without so much as a scratch on their hulls. The officers watched, their faces grim masks of disbelief. For some, it was their 5th time seeing it. The chilling effect didn't lessen. "It's got to be a system malfunction," grumbled General Threws, head of the 3rd Fleet. "Sensor phantoms, a cascading equipment failure. That border patrol is flying rust buckets held together by spit and a prayer." "The equipment was flawless," Vothkor countered, his tone cutting like a shard of glass. 3 independent diagnostic teams confirmed the logs. What we saw was real. "Then make it make sense," Thrust bellowed. "Humans are primitives. They were a Tier 7 civilization just 40 years ago, barely splitting the atom. They were still launching rockets with chemical fuel. It is physically impossible for them to have developed this kind of technology in 4 decades. And yet," a quiet voice sliced through the rising tension, "the evidence in front of us says they did." Every head in the room swiveled. High Minister Zelton stepped out from the shadows. He was ancient, even by Vorath standards, and had been the director of Imperial Intelligence since before most of the officers in the room had even been hatched. His face was a calm, unreadable mask, but his eyes held a shadow of worry that made Vothkor's stomach tighten into a knot. "What aren't you sharing with us, Minister?" Vothkor asked. Zelton glided toward the hologram and touched a control. The image flickered, replaced by a vibrant blue planet orbiting a single quiet moon. 40 years ago, he began, our Deep Range Survey Corps entered their home system. They observed humanity for 3 days, scanning their cities and their hilariously primitive spacecraft. They analyzed their broadcasts and their technology. The final assessment concluded that humans were thousands of years behind us. They were utterly insignificant, completely harmless. He pressed another button, and the view pulled back to show their entire solar system. Following standard protocol for uninteresting new species, the survey team left a single stealth drone in orbit. It was programmed to observe and send a status report every 5 years. "I've seen those reports," Threws grunted. "A whole lot of nothing. The humans were still messing around in the dirt, building a few more orbital stations, launching tiny probes to their gas giants. Nothing of consequence." "Exactly," Zelton said, his voice smooth as silk. "That is what the reports wanted us to believe. But 3 days ago, we sent a ship to finally retrieve the drone itself. It had gone silent 2 years prior. We assumed it had simply malfunctioned. We dispatched a recovery ship to collect the debris." He paused, and the massive chamber grew so silent you could hear the faint hum of the air circulation systems. The drone was in perfect working order. Its transmitter had been deliberately disabled. Someone had located it, carefully taken it apart, and switched it off. But they made one tiny error. They left its recording systems active. The hologram changed again, displaying a scene that made every battle-hardened officer in the room physically recoil. Earth and its moon were still there. But spanning the distance between them was a breathtaking network of shipyards. Hundreds of them, colossal, glowing structures, each one making the largest Vorath orbital factory look like a child's building block. And docked within those shipyards, thousands upon thousands of warships were under construction at a speed that was fundamentally impossible. The recording continued, showing massive fleets launching and assembling in the dark space behind the moon, hidden from view where no one would ever think to look. They were just waiting there, silent and still, like a pack of wolves gathering before a hunt. "The humans found our drone 23 years ago," Zelton said, his voice now a grave whisper. "They didn't smash it. They didn't raise an alarm. They dissected it, piece by piece. They learned our language from its databanks. They learned our technology from its schematics. They learned our fleet strategies from its tactical archives. They turned our own intelligence-gathering tool into the ultimate weapon against us. It's worse than that," Vathkor breathed, his eyes wide. "The material on their ship's hull. Our labs analyzed the sensor data. It's based on a composite material we abandoned 6,000 years ago because we could never make it stable. The humans must have found our failed research notes in the drone's files and figured out how to perfect it." General Threws looked physically ill, his face turning a pale shade of gray. "How many?" he croaked. "How many ships have they built?" "Based on this footage, our analysts estimate that humanity has constructed a minimum of 8,000 warships in the last 40 years. Every single one of them is a match for our capital ships, and many appear to be far more advanced." 8,000? Thruss's voice cracked. "The entire Imperial Navy only has 12,000 vessels. And half of those are support ships and cargo haulers," Vathkor added grimly. "Our actual combat-ready fleet is only about 5,000 strong." "Correct," Zelton confirmed. "And the humans are well aware of that too. They've been monitoring our fleet movements. They've mapped our territories. They know exactly where every one of our ships is and precisely how long it would take us to muster any kind of meaningful defense." Admiral Vathkor felt like the floor had just vanished beneath him. His entire understanding of the universe, the simple truth that the strong dominate the weak, was a lie. Humanity was supposed to be weak. They were anything but. "But why?" he asked, his voice raw with confusion. "Why build all of this in secret?" "Because they remembered our visit," Zelton answered softly. "They remembered our survey team looking down on them with condescension, dismissing them as irrelevant. They remembered us laughing at their primitive rockets and leaving their world without so much as a simple greeting. They made a collective decision, right then and there, that no one in the galaxy would ever look down on them like that again." At that exact moment, a communications ensign bolted into the hall, his face as white as a sheet. "Admiral, We have an incoming transmission from the human ship at the border. Put it on the main screen now, Vithkor barked. The hologram shifted a final time, and a human face appeared, the same woman from the patrol fleet's recording. "Greetings," she said, her expression perfectly composed, revealing nothing. "My name is Ambassador Sarah Chen, and I represent the United Earth Confederacy. I speak on behalf of all humankind." "Ambassador?" Vathkor's head was spinning. She had identified herself as a captain before. The military title was just a cover. This wasn't the first move in an invasion. It was a formal introduction. "We understand our sudden arrival may have caused some apprehension," Chen continued smoothly. "That was not our intention. We are not here to issue threats or make demands. We are here to talk." "Talk about what?" Vathkor snapped. "About the future," she replied simply. "About the possibility of peace, about a potential alliance between our two civilizations." She paused, letting the words sink in. "And about something else. There is a threat coming that will endanger us both. But that is a conversation for your emperor and your high council, not for an open military channel. We'll be waiting for your answer at the border." And with that, the screen went dark. The officers just stood there, completely stunned, their minds racing to keep up. General Thrus was the first to find his voice. "It has to be a trick. They're just trying to get us to drop our guard so they can hit us with everything they've got." "And why would they need to do that?" Zelton asked, his voice a calm anchor in the growing panic. "They're already holding all the cards. If they wanted a war, they wouldn't need to play games. They could have steamrolled us already." "Then what is it they want?" Thrus yelled. "Maybe," Zelton suggested, "they want exactly what she said, to talk." Admiral Vathkor could only stare at the blank space where Sarah Chen's face had been moments before. He hadn't seen any arrogance or malice in her eyes. All he saw was a quiet, unshakable confidence, and that was more terrifying than any weapon he had ever faced. "We have to inform the Emperor," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "This is way above our pay grade." He turned on his heel and marched toward the grand doors, the other officers scrambling behind him like lost children. On the hologram they left active, the image of Earth's massive silent shipyard still hung in the air. Thousands upon thousands of warships waiting in the darkness, all built by a people the Empire had dismissed as nothing more than primitives. Vathkor had lived his entire life believing that true power grew from the barrel of a plasma cannon. But as he hurried through the hallowed halls of Imperial Command, he started to wonder if he'd been wrong about everything. These humans had built a force that dwarfed his worst nightmares, and the very first thing they did with it was ask to have a conversation. A single question was about to bring a galactic empire to its knees. It was the same question bouncing around Emperor Vorath Thurto's mind as he swept into his council chambers. What kind of species builds a fleet that could snuff out entire star systems and then asks to talk? A tiny voice in the back of his mind whispered that these humans knew something his people didn't, a secret that could rewrite the rules of the universe. And the answer to that question is going to change everything, so you are definitely going to want to stick around for this. As the massive doors rumbled shut behind him, the chamber fell deathly quiet. And light years away, humanity waited with a chilling patience for the Empire's response. The Imperial Council hadn't seen this level of chaos in 3,000 years. The most powerful individuals in the Vorath Empire were screaming at each other like vendors in a crowded market. Sheer, unfiltered terror had completely shredded their usual composed dignity. Blind panic had replaced their legendary cool. Their entire galaxy was hanging by a thread, and not a single one of them had the faintest idea how to stop it from snapping. Emperor Vorath Thurto watched the complete meltdown from his throne. He was ancient. His scales faded to a pale, dusty gray, but his mind was as sharp as ever. In his 200 years on the throne, he'd seen it all. Brutal wars, devastating plagues, bloody rebellions. He had always, without fail, found a path to victory for his empire. But this was different. This was a kind of fear he didn't even have a name for. "We must strike now," roared Grand Marshal Thrawn, slamming his fist on the great table. "Every second we waste, the humans get stronger. We need to mobilize the entire fleet and crush them before they get any closer." "And what fleet would that be?" Admiral Bethor shot back. "We have what, 5,000 ships that are actually battle-ready? They have at least 8,000, and their technology is light years ahead of ours. We all saw the report. One of their ships took out 12 of ours and didn't even get a scratch. One ship." "Then we'll use our numbers," Thrawn bellowed. "We'll attack from all sides at once. We will overwhelm them." "You would sacrifice half our navy in a battle we are guaranteed to lose," High Minister Zelthan interjected, his voice as cold as deep space. "The humans are not fools. They've been observing our tactics. They'll know our every move before we even make it." "So what's your brilliant solution? Surrender? Just roll over for these primitives?" "They are not primitives." The voice came from the back of the chamber. Every single head whipped around to see Scholar Yella, the oldest member of the Academy of Sciences, slowly pushing herself to her feet. She looked frail, as if a strong breeze could blow her over, but her eyes were burning with a fierce intelligence. "They never were. We were just too arrogant to see it." She started walking toward the center of the room, her footsteps the only sound in the sudden deafening silence. "For the last 2 days, I have reviewed every single piece of data we have on humanity, their history, their culture, their art, everything, and I've reached a conclusion that chills me to my bones." "Then speak," the Emperor commanded. Yella bowed slightly. 40 years ago, when we first discovered Earth, we saw a species at war with itself, fractured into hundreds of nations, killing one another over patches of dirt and abstract ideas. We saw their polluted planet, their endless violence, and their clumsy technology. We called them weak because they weren't unified. We called them primitive because they hadn't even conquered their own solar system. We judged them by our own measure of success, and we never, not for 1 second, considered that they might have a different one. "What other measure is there?" Thrawn scoffed. "Patience, for starters," Yella replied, "and perhaps the wisdom to realize that a species can be dangerous, not because of the power it currently holds, but because of its potential." She touched a control, and the main screen lit up with images from Earth. Old footage flickered to life, showing scenes of pure horror. Cities reduced to rubble, millions dead. "Humanity has fought more wars with itself than our empire has in our entire 12,000-year history," she stated plainly. "They have survived genocide, nuclear fire, and the complete collapse of their planet's ecosystem. They have driven themselves to the very edge of extinction, time and time again, and always by their own hand. And every single time, they survived. They rebuilt, they learned, they grew stronger." The images on the screen changed, showing something new. Gleaming, bright cities rising from the ashes, old enemies shaking hands, former soldiers working side by side to build something new. They were building monuments not to great warriors, but to peace. "They remember their mistakes," Yella said softly. "They teach their children about the darkness of their own past, hoping the next generation will make better choices." When our scouts first laid eyes on them 40 years ago, humanity was in the middle of its greatest transformation. For the first time in their long history, they were learning how to become one people. "United so they could wage war on us?" Thrawn growled. "Perhaps. Or perhaps just united," Yella said, looking directly at the Emperor. "They could have attacked us at any time in the last 10 years. They had the ships, the technology, the element of surprise. But they didn't. They sent one ship, just one, to deliver a message. They disabled our patrol fleet without causing a single casualty. They asked for a peaceful dialogue." She paused, letting her words sink in. "Your Majesty, these are not the actions of a conqueror. These are the actions of a species that understands the true price of war and has absolutely no interest in paying it ever again." The room was perfectly still. The Emperor sat on his throne like a stone statue, his ancient eyes fixed on the images of humanity's brutal yet somehow beautiful history. "You believe they truly want peace?" he finally asked. "I believe they want something," Yella answered. "What that might be, I couldn't possibly say. but I do believe we should hear them out before we commit our empire to a war we will almost certainly not survive." Grand Marshal Kthron leaped to his feet. "This is madness. The Empire does not negotiate with lesser species. We have never shown weakness. If we agree to this meeting, every race under our rule will see it as a sign of weakness, an open invitation to rebel. And if we fight the humans and lose, there won't be an empire left for them to rebel against," Zelthan pointed out calmly. The screaming started up all over again. Insults and accusations flew across the chamber. The fear in the room was so thick you could barely breathe. And then a new voice cut through the chaos like a razor. "Silence!" Everyone froze. A communications officer was standing at the chamber entrance, his face as white as a ghost. "What is it?" the Emperor demanded. "The human ship, Your Majesty. It's changed position. It's now holding station right at the edge of our core systems, and it's not alone." He tapped a command on his datapad. The main screen switched to a tactical map of the border, and what they saw on that map made every single heart in that room stop dead. The single human ship was now joined by thousands of others. An entire fleet had materialized out of nowhere, forming a silent wall of steel across the border. 8,000 warships sitting in perfect formation, just waiting. "They jumped," Bethor whispered, his voice thick with a mixture of awe and terror. "They have faster-than-light travel we can't even detect. They moved their entire fleet across the galaxy, and we never saw a thing." "And yet, they are holding their position," Yella observed. "They are not advancing. They are not firing their weapons. They are simply waiting." And just like that, a signal came through. The main screen flickered to life, showing Ambassador Sarah Chen on the bridge of her flagship, her expression as calm as a frozen lake. Behind her, through a massive viewport, the human fleet was scattered across the blackness like a newly formed galaxy. "Your Majesty," she said, offering a small, respectful nod. "I must apologize for the rather dramatic entrance. My government believed it was vital to show you exactly how seriously we take this moment. We have no intention of using this fleet. We have no desire for war, but we needed you to see that we are approaching you as equals, not as beggars." She straightened her posture, her gaze meeting the Emperor's across the impossible distance of space. "We are, once again, requesting a meeting. We're not here to issue demands or make threats. We're here to talk. I will come to your border station completely alone. No weapons, no guards. I'm placing my life entirely in your hands as a gesture of our good faith." "Why?" the Emperor asked, the word escaping him before he could stop it. "You hold all the cards. You could annihilate us. Why are you asking for peace?" Ambassador Chen's face softened, and for a moment, a deep, ancient sadness flickered in her eyes. "Because we have destroyed before," she said gently. "We burned our own homeworlds. We slaughtered billions of our own people. We fought wars that left us with nothing but scars and sorrow. We learned, the hardest way imaginable, that there's no glory in conquest, no honor in destruction. There are only ashes and graves, and the unbearable weight of regret." She took a steadying breath, and when she spoke again, her voice was like forged steel. "We didn't build this fleet to conquer you. We built it to ensure that no one could ever dismiss us again. We built it so that when we came asking for peace, you would have to listen. We didn't come here to start a war, Your Majesty. We came here to end one before it ever began." The transmission ended, plunging the chamber into a deafening silence. 8,000 human warships hung in the void, a silent, patient ultimatum, waiting for an answer. Emperor Vorath Thurto looked at his council, at the raw terror carved into their faces. He thought of his empire's 12,000-year history, built on conquest and might, on the unwavering belief that strength was measured by the power to obliterate. And then he thought about a species that had learned, through unimaginable agony, that true strength was having that power, but choosing peace instead. "Send a message to the border station," he finally said, his voice echoing in the cavernous hall. "Inform the human ambassador that I will meet her personally, and order our fleet to stand down, for now." The council burst into chaos, but the Emperor simply raised a hand, and they were silenced instantly. "I am old," he said, his voice softer now. I have ruled for 200 years. I know what war does to a people. If there is even the slightest chance, any chance at all, to avoid that outcome, I'm going to take it. Prepare for the meeting. He rose from his throne and strode toward the doors. Behind him, an entire empire stood on the cusp of a new era, and out in the darkness, humanity waited, with open hands and patient hearts. Have you ever been dismissed as nothing? Told you're just a bunch of backward primitives, not even worth a conversation? Now imagine showing up 40 years later with a fleet so massive it could literally block out the stars. That's precisely what humanity just did, and what happens next is going to completely change how you think about power. So believe me, you're going to want to see this through to the end. For 3,000 years, the Imperial Border Station had been the ultimate symbol of Vorath dominance, a fortress adrift in the silent void between galaxies. Its cannons could vaporize entire fleets, and its shields could withstand a siege for months. No one of Ahos was ever foolish enough to even consider attacking it. But now, that mighty fortress was utterly dwarfed by 8,000 human warships, hanging in perfect silent formation, their dark hulls seeming to swallow the light from distant suns. They didn't move. They didn't broadcast threats. They just waited, like a storm gathering its strength just off the coast. From the observation deck, Admiral Vathkor watched them, his own fleet of 2,000 Vorath warships assembled behind him. These were the finest ships in the Empire, summoned from every corner of their vast territory. And next to the human armada, they looked like little toy boats floating in a bathtub. The Emperor's shuttle is en route, his aide reported. He should arrive at the neutral meeting point in approximately 20 minutes. Vathkor just nodded, his gaze fixed on the view screen. He couldn't tear his eyes away from the human ships. Their design was brutally efficient. No elegant curves, no ornate decorations, no wasted space. Every single line on those vessels was engineered for one purpose and one purpose only. They were weapons made manifest, built by a species that seemed to understand warfare in a way the Vorath had thankfully forgotten. Admiral, his aide said, his voice dropping to a tense whisper, you need to see this. He held out a data slate. Vathkor took it, and a bolt of ice shot through him. These are scans from their flagship, the one they call the Patient Hand, the aide explained. Our sensors finally managed to get a reading through its outer hull. The numbers on the screen, they were simply impossible. The ship's power core was generating more energy than the station's entire reactor network combined. Its weapon systems were of a design they couldn't comprehend, and its shields, if the data was even remotely accurate, could absorb a direct hit from the station's main cannon without so much as a flicker. One ship, Vathkor whispered, his voice cracking. Just one of their ships could destroy this entire station on its own. Yes, Admiral. And they brought 8,000 of them. Vathkor handed the slate back. His hands were perfectly steady, but inside, a lifetime of unwavering certainty had just been shattered into a million pieces. His faith in the invincible Vorath Empire was dissolving with every impossible number he read. In the silent gulf between the two colossal fleets, a pair of small shuttles made their way toward each other. One was a magnificent Vorath vessel, carrying Emperor Vorath himself and his personal honor guard. The other was a plain, unarmed human transport. It carried a single passenger, Ambassador Sarah Chen. They both docked at a tiny neutral platform constructed specifically for this meeting. The Emperor emerged first, flanked by 20 of his most elite warriors, all clad in the ancient ceremonial gold and crimson armor of their ancestors, a symbol of 12,000 years of uninterrupted dominion. Ambassador Chen stepped out completely alone. She wore a simple gray uniform with no medals, no awards, and no visible weapons. She walked directly toward the Emperor, her stride steady and calm, showing not a single trace of fear. She stopped at a respectful distance and offered a slight bow. "Your Majesty," she said, "thank you for agreeing to see me." The Emperor sized her up. She was so small compared to a Vorath, almost fragile. Her entire lifespan was likely just a blink of an eye to him. And yet the way she stood there, meeting his gaze, was not like a servant before a king. It was like she was looking at an equal. "You have certainly made quite an entrance, Ambassador," the Emperor said, his voice a low rumble. "My empire hasn't been this shaken in 3,000 years. "That was never our intention, Your Majesty," she replied smoothly. "Fear leads to poor decisions. We wanted to have a frank and honest conversation, free of that kind of static." "And the 8,000 warships are just to make sure we're listening, I take it?" "The 8,000 warships are here because you wouldn't have listened otherwise," she said, her eyes locking with his. "When your scouts visited Earth 40 years ago, they mocked us. They labeled us primitives. They left without a single word of greeting or an offer of trade or any attempt at diplomacy. They decided we were beneath you." The Emperor remained silent. He remembered that report. He remembered signing off on it, concurring with its dismissive assessment. He hadn't given humanity a second thought since that day. "We understood," Chen went on. "We learned that in this galaxy the weak are ignored, while the strong are given a seat at the table. We realized that if we ever wanted you to truly hear us, we had to earn that right. So we built, we learned, we prepared, and now we are here, ready to speak as equals." Grand Marshal Kethron, a famously hot-tempered warrior accompanying the Emperor, took an aggressive step forward. "Equality? Your people have only been traveling the stars for a few decades. Equality is earned over millennia." "No," Chen said, her voice remaining perfectly level. "We demonstrated our power to ensure our words would not be dismissed. We are not demanding equality. We are asking for your understanding." She turned her focus back to the Emperor. "Your Majesty, I have a request, and it may sound absurd after this show of force. All we ask is that you watch what our fleet does next, and after you've seen it, simply listen to what we have to say." "Watch what?" the Emperor demanded. "A demonstration," she replied. "With your permission, I will order our fleet to fire upon your station." The Emperor's guards instantly raised their weapons. Kethron drew his ceremonial blade, but the Emperor raised a hand, halting them all. "You wish to attack my station, to prove that you can destroy us?" "No, Your Majesty," she said, "to prove that we could, but that we choose not to." Something in her voice, a profound sadness he couldn't quite identify, made him pause. "Proceed," he commanded. Chen tapped a small device on her wrist. "All ships, execute pattern 7, single volley." Back on the station's bridge, Admiral Vothkor watched in horror as the human fleet came alive. 8,000 ships moved as one, their weapon ports glowing with a low-frequency hum that seemed to vibrate right through the station's hull and into his very bones. Imagine watching your boss make the worst decision of his life, and all you can do is stand there. That's what happened when the Admiral, with a smirk plastered on his face, roared, "Light 'em up! Let's show these primitives what a real Navy can do." And what a show it was. A blinding wave of pure destruction shot from our cannons, lasers, missiles, energy blasts that could crack a moon in half. The human station's shields flared up, absorbing the first volley, then the second, and then nothing. The attack was over. Not a scratch, not a single scorch mark. The Admiral stared, his jaw hanging open. They missed?" he stammered, completely baffled. "How could every single shot miss?" His second-in-command turned, his face as white as a sheet. "Sir, they didn't miss," he whispered. "They hit us with everything. They just tuned their weapons to the exact frequency our shields could block. They knew our defenses down to the last watt and hit us with an arsenal perfectly designed to do nothing." That single thought hit Admiral Vothkor like a ton of frozen bricks. This wasn't a botched attack. It was a message. The humans had just demonstrated that they could land any punch they threw, but they could also choose to pull it so it felt like a feather. They had the power to decide with terrifying precision who lived and who died. And they had just let every soul on that station live. Standing on the diplomatic platform, Ambassador Chen watched the Emperor's face go from confusion to disbelief. and finally, to a slow, creeping horror. The arrogance in his eyes melted away, replaced by something that looked an awful lot like respect. "If we had wanted you gone," she said, her voice perfectly calm, "you would already be dust. Your station, your fleet, this entire empire. We've done the math. We know exactly how this ends." She took a small step forward, her voice dropping to a more personal level. "We spent 40 years figuring out how to erase you from the stars. Then we spent the next 40 years learning how not to. Because we've been the monster before, Your Majesty. We burned our own world to the ground. We butchered our own people. We know what total victory feels like, and believe me, it tastes like ash." She reached out and gently placed a hand on his armored forearm. It was a move so unbelievably bold it should have ended with her immediate execution. "We came here with enough firepower to turn you into a history lesson," she said. "But we're offering something else, a choice. We can be partners, or we can be enemies. We can build a future together, or we can tear each other down to the last ship. We will respect your decision, whatever it is. But you needed to understand that when we offer peace, it is not from a position of weakness. We are not begging. We are offering it as equals." The Emperor stood completely still for what felt like an age. His royal guards were frozen, clueless. Grand Marshal Kethrin looked like he was about to faint, but the Emperor was 300 years old. He had learned to recognize the truth when he heard it. "Why?" he finally managed to ask, his voice raspy. "You have this unimaginable power. Why offer peace at all?" Ambassador Chen gave him a sad, wise smile. "Because we learned the hard way that power isn't the prize, Your Majesty. We learned that lesson while standing in the ruins of our own cities, on top of the graves of our own children." She met his gaze, and for a moment he saw the crushing weight of human history in her eyes. Every war, every horrible mistake, and every painful step they took to crawl out of that darkness. "We don't want to rule the galaxy. We just want a safe home in it. And there's one more thing. Something is waking up in the empty space between galaxies, something that's coming for all of us, and we would much rather face it with friends." We'll get back to that part of the story later. For now, all you need to know is what happened next. The Emperor's face was impossible to read. The silence in the room was so thick you could feel it. Finally, he nodded to his personal guard. "Stand down," he commanded, his voice echoing. "Get me a line to the council. Tell them I'm returning to the capital, and the ambassador will be my honored guest." His eyes locked with Chen's. "It appears you and I have a great deal to discuss, Ambassador. For the good of both our species, I truly hope you're telling the truth." "So do I, Your Majesty," she replied, her voice solid as rock. "So do I." And with that, they walked toward the shuttle that would carry them to the heart of the Vorith Empire, two worlds now connected by the thinnest, most delicate thread, hope. The Imperial throne room wasn't just a room. It was the soul of the Vorith people. Its walls were carved from the living rock of their long-lost homeworld. The ceiling was a perfect star map of its night sky, and the floor was a breathtaking mosaic, with each tile naming an emperor from their 12,000-year history. Ambassador Sarah Chen walked down this sacred hall with the fearsome Emperor Barath of Frink at her side. Behind them, the entire Imperial Council followed in a state of stunned silence. At the far end of the hall sat the throne, a colossal seat of power from which the destiny of the galaxy had been shaped for generations. This whole grand entrance had been the Emperor's idea. He wanted his council to hear what this human had to say, straight from her mouth. He needed them to feel the ground shifting beneath them, just as he had. Chen stopped just before the throne and turned to face the rulers of the most powerful empire in the galaxy. She stood alone, having politely declined the offer of a security detail. Here, in the heart of power, her words were her only weapon. "You asked me why we came seeking peace," she began, her voice ringing out with perfect clarity. "You wanted to know why a species with our capabilities would choose partnership over conquest. I'm here to tell you. But first, You have to understand a little something about a small blue world we call Earth." She touched a device on her wrist, and a hologram of a beautiful blue and white planet materialized in the air, a fragile jewel hanging in the darkness. 300 years ago, she said, humanity nearly destroyed itself. We built weapons that could shatter continents. We raised armies so vast they scarred the face of our world. We drew imaginary lines on maps, separated ourselves by our beliefs or the color of our skin, and told ourselves those lines were worth dying for. The hologram flickered, and the beautiful blue world was replaced by scenes from a nightmare. Cities engulfed in fire, mushroom clouds blooming where forests once stood, and streets filled with the dead. We fought wars that killed hundreds of millions. We poisoned our air, choked our oceans, and burned our own lands. We came one button push away from wiping ourselves out completely. And for what? For pride. For fear. For the insane belief that we were right and everyone else was wrong. The council members began to stir restlessly. They'd all read the reports about how savage humans were, but seeing it laid out like this was something else entirely. This wasn't a history lesson. It was a confession. And then we just stopped, Chen said, her voice dropping to a whisper. No miracle saved us. We just stopped. We stopped because we were standing in the ashes of everything we had ever loved, and we finally understood the cost. We looked at the faces of the children we had lost and asked ourselves if any flag or any piece of dirt was worth that price. The question echoed in the massive hall. The answer was no. That was the day humanity began to heal. It took generations. It was painful, and it forced us to make compromises that almost broke us. But the hardest part was forgiveness. We had to forgive our enemies for what they did. And just as hard, we had to forgive ourselves for what we had become. We had to build a future on a foundation made of nothing but ash. She looked right at the Emperor. 40 years ago, when your scouts first found us, we were still picking up the pieces. You saw a primitive race, Your Majesty. You were mistaken. We weren't primitive. We were a species in recovery. And when we saw the arrogance in your messengers' eyes, the way they looked down on us, we knew we had to face a painful truth. She stood a little taller, her voice gaining strength. We realized the rest of the galaxy was still playing by the same old savage rules that almost destroyed us. The strong dominate the weak. The powerful take what they want. And violence is the only universal language. We looked at your great empire, and we saw a mirror image of our own horrific past, a past we had clawed our way out of. Grand Marshal Catherine, a mountain of a man draped in metals, lunged forward, his face contorted with rage. That's an insult! The Vorith Empire brought order to 1,000 worlds. We ended the forever wars. We created peace. You're not wrong, Chen calmly agreed. You did it with an iron fist, through conquest, by making every other species so afraid of you that they wouldn't dare step out of line. That's one way to have peace, I suppose. But it's not the only way. And the peace you've built is a house of cards. She turned to face him directly. Your allies don't follow you out of loyalty. They obey you out of fear. The moment you show a single sign of weakness, they will tear you apart. The second a bigger predator enters this pond, your empire will shatter into 1,000,000 warring pieces. You've built your civilization on fear, Marshal, and fear is the most unstable foundation in the entire universe. The Imperial Marshal's hand twitched, hovering over his pistol, but the Emperor's voice crashed through the throne room like thunder. Stand down, Marshal. Let her speak. Imagine being so outmatched, so vulnerable, that the only thing keeping you alive is the curiosity of a king who could crush you without a second thought. That was Ambassador Chen's reality, and if you think you know how this story ends, I promise you, you don't. She gave a small, grateful nod. Your Majesty, I'm not here to question your power. I'm here to warn you that a storm is coming that no amount of power can stop. The holographic map behind her zoomed out, revealing the entire galaxy. but from the edge of deep space, a patch of pure, inky blackness was seeping inward like a cancer on the cosmos. Our deep space telescope spotted this 30 years ago. We call it the hollow. It's a wave of absolute nothing, a void that eats everything it touches, and it's rolling toward us from the space between galaxies. We don't know what it is, a freak cosmic event, some ancient superweapon, or a kind of life we can't even comprehend. The only thing we know for certain, she went on, as a nervous murmur spread through the colossal chamber, is that it's headed our way, and it's going to get here in roughly 200 years. Now, for an empire that had existed for millennia, 200 years might as well be next week. Our scientists ran every simulation imaginable, Chen said, her voice unshakable. If the hollow arrives and finds our galaxy divided, with everyone fighting each other, the result is terrifyingly simple. We all get wiped out, one system at a time. Your magnificent empire and your mighty fleets will be erased from history. Humanity and all our technology will be gone. If we try to face this alone, we are all going to die. She let that sink in, the silence heavier than a dying star. But if we face it together, with our combined knowledge, our shared resources, and our united will to survive, we might just have a chance. That's the real reason we built our fleet, Your Majesty. It was never meant to attack you. It was built so that when we came to you to offer an alliance, you'd have a reason to take us seriously. The Emperor rose from his enormous throne, and each step he took down the dais boomed with absolute authority. He stopped right in front of the human ambassador. She looked so small, so fragile next to his towering form, but she didn't even blink. "You're asking us for trust," he rumbled, his voice like the grinding of continents. "You want us to believe that a species we only just met is telling the truth, to accept that this impossible threat is real and that teaming up is our only way out." "I'm asking you to consider it," Chen answered, her tone perfectly level. "Look at our data, run your own simulations, and draw your own conclusions. We aren't demanding an answer today. We've been getting ready for 40 years. We can wait a little longer." "And what if we say no?" the Emperor challenged. "What if we decide this empire can handle this threat on its own?" Chen's calm expression never faltered. "Then we will defend our home if you attack, and we'll prepare for the hollow by ourselves. We won't force you into this alliance, because if we did that, we'd become the very conquerors we're trying not to be." She took a quiet breath. "But I sincerely hope you don't refuse. I hope that when you look at what we've done, building a fleet only for defense, showing our strength without firing a single shot, and coming to you with an open hand instead of a raised fist, you'll see a reason to believe us. We're offering you something this galaxy has never seen before, Your Majesty. A true partnership, between equals, a future built on mutual respect, not on fear." The grand throne room plunged into a deep, heavy silence. Every courtier, every guard, every official held their breath, their eyes glued to the Emperor. His next words would decide the fate of trillions. He thought about the 12,000-year history of his empire, all the species they had crushed, the worlds they had conquered, the power they had hoarded. He thought about the foundation of fear Chen had mentioned, and deep down, he knew she was right. Loyalty born from fear evaporates the second you show any weakness. And then he pictured the hollow, that creeping, silent nothingness coming to consume it all. "I've ruled for 200 years, he said finally. "My choices have shaped the lives of trillions, but never, in my entire life, have I faced a decision of this magnitude." He looked at the faces of his council. "We are at a crossroads. We can stick to our old ways, ruling by force, by conquest, by keeping everyone else out. We can pretend these humans in this hollow aren't our problem. Or we can take a monumental leap of faith. We can dare to believe that these humans are exactly who they say they are. We can build something the likes of which has never been seen." He turned back to Chen. "I'm choosing the second path. I'm choosing this alliance. Not because I trust you completely, because I don't, but because I saw the power you could have used against us, and you chose not to. That choice, that act of restraint, is something I haven't seen in 12,000 years of our history. And that, Ambassador, is a risk I'm willing to take. He held out his massive hand, copying the human gesture he'd been briefed on. Ambassador, on behalf of the Vorith Empire, welcome. Let's get to work. Chen took his hand, her own grip surprisingly firm. Your Majesty, I promise you, this is a decision you will not regret. 1 year later, the galaxy was a completely different place. Vorith and human warships flew in formation during joint training exercises. Their best scientists were now colleagues, sharing labs, trading breakthroughs, and pushing technology forward at an incredible pace. The Empire's vassal races, once kept in line by pure terror, were given a new deal. Become our partners, not our subjects. Work with us, don't just obey us. Some systems decided to remain with the new alliance, while others chose to become independent. And for the first time in 12,000 years, the Empire simply let them go in peace. The new joint fleet patrolled the frontier, a shield against pirates and the first line of defense against the approaching Hollow. The human captain, Sarah's nephew James Chen, stood on the bridge of the flagship, watching the starfields drift by. Beside him, a Vorith officer, Vathkor the Younger, whose own father had been the admiral who first met the human fleet, kept his eyes on the sensor arrays. He'd grown up hearing the story of that day, the shock, the terror, and the impossible choice that came after. Do you honestly think we can stop it? Vathkor asked in a low voice. The Hollow, I mean, he added. Are we actually strong enough? Captain Chen thought about it for a moment. To be honest, I have no idea, he admitted. Nobody does. But here's what I do know. A year ago, our two species were on the brink of destroying each other. Today, we're standing here as allies, preparing to face the darkness together. No matter what happens next, that right there is already a victory. He pointed to the ships around them, Vorith destroyers and human cruisers flying in perfect sync, their crews working as one unit. My aunt always said that humanity's greatest weapon wasn't our tech or our ships. It was our ability to change, our ability to look at our own worst impulses and choose to be better. Maybe that's the real secret that will see us through this. It's not the weapons we have that will save us, but the choice we made to use them to protect instead of to conquer. Vathkor nodded slowly, letting the idea sink in. Your species is strange, human. You have the power to rule, yet you ask for cooperation. You have the strength to destroy, yet you show mercy. I have to admit, I still don't entirely get it. Captain Chen gave a small smile. Sometimes we don't either, but we try. And in the end, that's all any of us can really do. The fleet sailed onward, deeper into the void, its engines painting trails of light against the endless black. Behind them, 1,000 worlds waited, trapped between hope and dread. Ahead of them lay the great unknown. But for the first time, they weren't facing it by themselves. Human and Vorith, together. Old enemies had become trusted friends. Two powerful civilizations, each with its own violent past, were now reaching for a future that neither could have possibly built alone. And out in the silent darkness between galaxies, the Hollow kept coming. It didn't know fear. It didn't have a capacity for mercy. Its only purpose was to devour everything. But for the first time in ages, something new was waiting for it. Something that had learned how to turn weapons into shields and enemies into allies. Something that had chosen, against all odds and the entire weight of history, to take a chance on peace. Humanity had shown up, and the galaxy would never be the same.